Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing again. Believe in a power greater than what you are going through. When you don't know what to do, keep breathing.
That's right. When you don't know what to do, just keep on breathing. From Los Angeles, which is the city of angels, and from the Big Apple in New York City, kind of a war zone these days. Welcome to all my listeners out there in Radio Land. I'm Dave, the Caregiver's Caregiver, at caregiverdave.com, along with my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg from the Caregiver Space. And we're coming to you live and on demand 24/7 on 25 global audio and video platforms, including places like iHeartRadio, iTunes, YouTube, Facebook Live, SoundCloud, Blog Talk Radio, and about 20 more other platforms around the world. So we're so proud to be voted the #1 caregiver podcast of the top 50 on Player FM, and one of the 6 best podcasts by Caring.com, as well as #3 podcast out of thousands of caregiver podcasts on FeedSpot. And we have an exciting show planned for you today, don't we, Adrienne?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do. Robert Eli Kershaw Jr., otherwise known as Bob. Bob became a caregiver of sorts at the age of 10. That's got to be the youngest caregiver I know of. When he met a young boy the same age who had Down syndrome, created a friendship, and the rest, as they say, is history. But before I go into that, I want to take this moment and thank my last week's guest, Pentaha Vahidi. And just a reminder, you can watch or listen to that interview and all our interviews on our membership website and all the 25 global platforms mentioned. All right, enough of that. Welcome to the show, Bob. I'm so excited to have you on.
Thank you so much. It's
And I like
real
to
pleasure.
ask, hey, the pleasure's ours. I'd like to ask our guest the first question: who is Bob Kershaw, and why was he placed on this earth?
Good question. If you find out, let me know. No, I've been basically I've been working with people all my life. When I was really young, my parents were very community minded, I guess you could call it. My father was always involved with the Scouts and that type of thing. They got me into 4-H. I was with the church youth group, so they really instilled that whole thing about community and being a part of the greater good type thing. And when I was, like you said, when I was 10 years old, I met Charlie, who I thought he was Chinese. I was so excited that I had a Chinese friend. I looked it up in the dictionary about anything I could find about China, and I went home one day and I told my mother, and she said invite him over, so I did. And after he left, my mother said, well, I always knew when she wanted to talk to me because she asked me to help her with the dishes. So I went over and got my towel, and I figured I was in for something. And she tried to explain to me that he wasn't Chinese, but he had something called Mongoloidism, which was used many years ago as what they would call Down syndrome nowadays. And so we went through that, and I still didn't quite understand it, and I was pretty disappointed he wasn't Chinese. And so I looked up Mongoloidism in the encyclopedia, and I found out it was actually from Mongolia, which is in Asia. So I figured, well, that's the second best thing, so I guess
Close enough.
I'm all set. But he and I became really good friends, and over about a year or so, I guess. And what was happening was the kids in the neighborhood, some of them anyway, not all of them at all, but some of the kids in the neighborhood would taunt him and tease him, and he thought it was a game. He had this thing where, if somebody pushed him, then he thought it was a game. It was me, now I got to go push you. And what I couldn't understand is why he didn't understand that they were really teasing him. And so I would eventually jump in and tell him to go run. and he would run, and I would get beat up instead. So, and then eventually, ended up going to camp. I asked him if he was going to go to camp, and he said, "No, they don't take people like me." So I thought that was kind of strange, but so anyway, I went to camp, and when I came back, he wasn't there. His family had moved away. His father was in the service, I believe, and so he was deployed somewhere else. And so, of course, when you're 10 years old, you think you failed. I should have done this, and I didn't do enough of this, and I didn't protect him well enough, and blah blah blah. And apparently, I don't remember this, but my mother told me one day that I told her that I wanted to do something to change the way people would treat somebody like him, and and I didn't know how, or I guess, or whatever. But and about, I would say, 7 years later, I was working with. I had joined a group called Senior Teens Against Retardation, which is now changed. It's Senior Teens Aid Recreation, and and what it is teenagers. It's a group of teenagers that go out and work with kids with disabilities and take them out to bowling, movies, or whatever, and create different environments for them in the community. And so I had been working with them for a while, and one of the kids there, I asked him if he said his brother was going to go to camp, and I asked him if he was going to go, and he said no, and he said almost the exact same thing that Charlie said, that they don't take people like me. And that really hit me hard. It was kind of like, I got to do something, So within 2 years, I started a camp. I was about 19 or 20 when I started it, and it was called Camp Happiness, which is spelled wrong because I can't spell, and the whole thing was that none of the adults thought that we could do it or we should do it, and they really put up a lot of obstacles for us. And so finally, I said, we're going to do this, and I got there was about 30 teenagers that agreed they wanted to do it, so we did it. And we pulled together 30 teenagers, 60 kids with disabilities. We created the camp for 1 week, and it was one of the most exhilarating things that I've ever done before. And I think a lot of it had to do with me creating it. It was out of my mind. And me being more of a hyperactive, I think I had ADD then, and nobody knew it. And all the things that were going on at the time with Vietnam and the hippie movement and drugs and all this stuff, there was something that I did that was just so different. Almost, I want to say almost so pure, because it was just pure love that these kids put into getting this camp together. And so the following year, I had to go to Brazil. I was in 4-H, and I got nominated to go to Brazil for the International 4-H Youth Exchange. And so I had to kind of relinquish my position as director. And so it taught me a lot of letting go. This was my baby. I created it in my mind. And I could see it was a good lesson for me, because nowadays I see where I have a hard time letting things go. And I always go back to that time and knowing that I have to have faith in other people. If they love what they're doing and they're going to do it the best way they can, then I have to let it go. And I see that in so many people nowadays. And I also work with teenagers now and kids with disabilities, and that's a hard thing for teens to do, is to let things go like that. So anyway, that's where I come from, who I am, and what I do. Basically, right now I'm working for Washington County Mental Health, and I have a client that I work with, and I basically take them out into the community and get them kind of acclimated to the community, and we go we have to have our Dunkin' Donuts wrap in the morning, and of course everybody in Dunkin' Donuts knows him now, and so he's being really acclimated into the community, and everybody knows him. He's an amazing artist. In fact, in the picture and on the back of the book, the background is one of his paintings. So I utilize a lot of the stuff that I do during the day. And I'm 72 years old this in August, and I'm still moving.
Hey, listen, we're going to take an early break because we had a problem with Facebook Live. I accidentally ended it and restarted it. So you'll have to reshare the video above the one you were sharing while we're on our break. That'd be a great time for you to do that, and we will be right back. Don't go away. Dave Nassaney, the Caregiver's Caregiver, has just released his 6th book entitled It's My Life Too, Thrive to Stay Alive as a Caregiver. It was specifically written for caregivers who know they should be putting their needs first, but just don't know how. Dave is the sole caregiver to his wife, Charlene, since 1996. He knows firsthand what caregivers are going through, because he is one. He now speaks all across the country, offering caregivers his amazing caregiver support package. Even the airlines tell us that in the event of an emergency, to put your oxygen mask on first, before you help your child with their mask. They know that those who don't heed their advice often black out, thus becoming unable to help either themselves or their child. And caregivers are exactly the same way. It's My Life Too, Thrive and Stay Alive as a Caregiver will help caregivers who are neglecting their sleep, diet, and social life and learn to put their needs first. Pick up your copy today or buy one for your special caregiver. On sale everywhere and at caregiverdave.com. Then we're back with Bob Kershaw and my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg. And I'm Dave Nassaney on the Caregiver Dave Show. Sometimes I have marbles in my mouth. I don't know where they come from. But
I lost my marbles, so I'm fine.
So, where's the transition? How did you go from this friend? By the way, do you know where he is today? Have you lost contact?
No, I don't. I mean, Charlie. I had looked around. I couldn't remember his name for years, and then I decided to go to the city hall or town hall and see if I could find it there. And I did find the last name, and I searched and searched, and it's been so many years. I have no idea. I couldn't find him on these, the Google search thing, and a lot of the same names came up, but they were definitely not them. So I have no idea.
Technology, how birth parents find their adopted children and vice versa. You'd think that they had some way of finding him.
Maybe you could go through the military. Find out where he was
learning about the dad. That should be very easy.
Tracing the
Never
dad
thought of that.
Get us there.
Yeah,
well,
definitely.
Right here, Bob. So, how soon after that first encounter with him, I assume you realized you got so much fulfillment of being this boy's protector and a caregiver, because you were really his caregiver at such an early age, you're right, that he says, this is fun. I want to do this the rest of my life. Did you have an aha moment like that, or did it just fall into your lap?
I think it just fell into my lap. It was one of those things where he was just so much fun to be with. And I don't like to put...
By the way, Down syndrome children, you're right, are the nicest, most happiest, most wonderful people to be around. I know a few, and why do you think that is?
I don't know. I think it's just in their nature. It's something that somebody told me one day that they said they had so many adversities that God put a huge smile on their face. So that's the only thing I can think of. Yeah.
and we can learn something from even them.
Exactly.
Instead of saying, we don't want people like you at camp.
Yeah. Well, and in a lot of ways, when he was being pushed around, he thought it was a game. He was, everything was a game.
They only look for the good in others. All of the godly principles that we're supposed to have, and gosh, maybe heaven is just a whole bunch of Down syndrome people in it. I don't know.
I hope so, because I'll be there.
Maybe we'll be Down syndrome.
That's our next planet. Oh gosh. I don't know.
What were the biggest struggles that you found just as a caregiver? And what was your first caregiving experience besides Charlie?
Oh, well, the camp was one, and with the camp, I found myself. I was taking care of the kids. I was taking care of the teenagers. I was responsible for anything that happened there. The physical makeup of the camp. So as far as being a caregiver, I was kind of, everything was all encompassing in that sense. And
manager.
Yeah, exactly.
As well.
And
yeah.
And a lot of that comes into play when you're a caregiver. I always tell people, when you walk into somebody's room as a caregiver, you leave your baggage outside because you're in their world, not yours. So when I walk into Nathan's room, Nathan is the boy that I work with, and he has his own chapter now, of course. But when I walk in the room, he doesn't want to hear the bad day I had. He can't get out of bed unless I lift him up and put him in the wheelchair. So he's totally dependent on me. Now, his happiness and his mobility and everything depends on me. So for me to come in and say, "Oh, Nathan, I had the worst day. I don't know what to do," blah, 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 blah. And, when I look at him, he's just like sitting there looking at me like, "Oh, yeah? You want to talk about the worst day?" And
my wife's like that.
I have to really kind of reprogram myself. And I did that a couple of times, and he really taught me that when I'm a caregiver, and if I'm going to be the caregiver, I can't be the one that's going to be taken care of, or consoled or whatever. You see that in the hospitals and nurses. When the nurse, she could, and I've seen nurses come in and they bring their garbage with them. I call it garbage because sometimes it is. And they come in and they, what do you want now, or something? They'll say something that they don't really mean, but they're just in that moment. Yeah, exactly. And especially now with COVID-19, I know so many people in the hospital that are so burned out, and to see how they have to walk in and present themselves in a way that is not going to bring those people down. It's such a transition. I mean, they should be on Broadway. I mean, they're unbelievable actors and actresses, and they just to be able to change your whole personality when you walk in, when you've had the worst day ever, or you just saw 2 people die, and you can't cry in front of this other person.
No.
This is, you have to leave your baggage outside the door, and you come in, and that's what a caregiver does. And I always tell everybody, if you want to be a caregiver, you have to understand it's the hardest job in the world. I don't care what anybody says. I've been a truck driver, I've been a cook, I've been a dishwasher, I've worked on I designed windows for stores, I've worked on Broadway for a while. Oh, really? We have to talk. And I've worked in so many areas, and I find that the hardest job I've ever had is working as a caregiver, because you're responsible for that person's existence at that moment. When I pick Nathan up, I know I'm supposed to use a Hoyer lift, but they don't have one, so I have to enable myself to be able to pick him up, put him in the wheelchair. Now, if I drop him, that's my responsibility, So I make sure that I do not, and everything I do is calculated. Everything that I say to him is calculated. we created jokes together so that we can both laugh. And the other thing is, when I was growing up, I was taking care of a friend of mine who had AIDS, and my father had a heart problem, and my next door neighbor had had a stroke, and I was their caregiver for about 6 years, 5 or 6 years, I guess, off and on. And I went to, I didn't know how to take care of somebody with HIV. So I went to the library and I asked them a question. I need something to show me, a book that'll kind of give me some insight on what to do with as a caregiver, because there's really nothing out there. I couldn't find anything, and this was long before the internet, and you just couldn't find anything. And Google was non-existent. So I went to the library and we went through a whole bunch of stuff. And he says, "I got to tell you, the only thing we have here is things on nursing and doctors and protocol and blah 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 and the whole thing." And I said, "No, I need something that's going to get me ready to go into that room. What do I need to do? How do I need to approach it? And especially for a friend or a family member, And so he says, "Well, I've got something for you, but you're going to have to translate it." And when he said that, I was like, really curious. So he brought me this book, and I took it home and I read it. And the name of the book was Caring for Your Pet. And what I found out in that book was that taking care of somebody who has a hard time explaining what's going on to them or going on with them, you have to, just like with a pet, you have to know what the pee-pee dance is. You have to know what the I want to go out dance is. You want to know what the I'm hungry dance. I just want to lay on your lap dance.
My world.
Not a lap dance, but you know what I mean. But you have to know those things with your pet. The pet, unless you have a talking parrot, is not going to tell you what he wants. And the same thing goes with somebody who's disabled or, very, very ill. When you walk in, you have to kind of know or create a language between you and the person you're taking care of. There were so many things that I learned through that book about the position of the person, the facial expressions, their body language. All of that stuff is just so important to a caregiver, that if you don't have that, you're really going to lose out. And it took me a while to get it, but I did get it. There were a lot of times when a couple of people I was working with, I was in there and doing what I thought I was supposed to be doing, and he would say, "Get thee out, get out of here. I don't need you right now, And I took that personally, And one thing I found out with that also is you can't take that personally. Their world is in turmoil, and being the caregiver, you need to really understand that and cope with what you have to do to make that work. And it's just such an amazing experience for me anyway. I think that was the hardest time. That was definitely the hardest.
I mean, if I ever get sick, I think I'm going to call you to be my caregiver.
Yeah, I was saying.
We're both.
Well, I do puppet shows too.
Wow. So you mentioned all those occupations you had, the truck driver and the cook and all of that. I mean, how many years, if you were to put them together, were you actually a caregiver when you weren't doing all that other stuff?
I was actually a caregiver while I was doing those jobs also, because during the time that when I was working in Massachusetts for a while, I was working with a group home. But I also had a job as a designer for Jordan Marsh. I was designing interiors and whatnot. And then when I moved to New York, I was basically taking. I met my next door neighbor, who she was 90, and he was 92, and he eventually died. But he was every night about 3 o'clock in the morning. His wife Elsie would call me up and say he needs to go to the potty. And so at 3 o'clock in the morning, sometimes in my underwear, I'd run right across the street, go in and pick him up, put him on the john, and we'd sit there and talk about sauerkraut or because he used to make sauerkraut in Long Island. And I learned so much from, just all of that, talking to him and being a part of his life in that way. And of course, half the time he would say sorry, it was false alarm, and I would just pick him up, put him back in bed, and then say, see you in the morning, So there was always somebody along the way. I think there was only maybe 5 or 6 years that I didn't care for anybody. And when I was in Brazil, I lived in Brazil for almost 2 years, and I was the program I was with was to try to see what kind of what you can do with the youth within in that area. And what I found was that the young people in the location that I was living in, the Japanese had total control of the agriculture, and they were the rural people. And then the city people were mostly Brazilian or mestizos or I can't remember what they call them, but they were Portuguese and native. And so it was one of those things where I could see there was a big barrier there. So I started a group called Os Meninos, Clube Mini is like mini agricultural club in Portuguese. And what it was the young people that were Japanese, and I would work with them and get them to understand what they were doing there, and then introduce them to the city and youth groups in the city, and to kind of do that interchange. Mm-hmm. And so as a caregiver, I was, when I say caregiver, the term caregiver to me is so wide. It involves every single person on this planet. We take care of the planet. We take care of ourselves. We take care of our families. We take care of everything, our pets or whatever. We take care of our neighborhood, or don't, either one. So it's a bigger
we have people watching us on Facebook Live, and Chris asks, is it wrong that I'm frustrated being brief. He's got the disease, but it always seems like I'm always on the back burner. I'm getting tired.
That's caregiving.
Yeah, they've got the disease.
Now, he's the one that is being cared for?
Chris is the caregiver.
He's the caregiver. Okay.
Yeah. So he's saying he's frustrated. Something about belong or brief. He's got the disease, but it seems like I'm always on the back burner. I'm getting tired. So tired he can't text correctly. He can't understand what he's saying.
That's all right.
But I get the gist of it. Yeah, he has Parkinson's, by the way. The one he cares.
Oh, he has Parkinson's. Yeah, so he is the one being taken care of.
No, the caregiver.
No, the loved one has Parkinson's.
Taken care of, right?
Oh, I see. Okay.
And they're not easy to take care of,
No. What I found was there's a lot of times when I'm with people. For example, there was a person that I was working with a long time ago, and they really couldn't do much. There was all these, you could do certain things. You could, lift them up, put them aside, whatever, whatnot. And what I had to figure out is, how can I animate myself enough to animate him? Mm-hmm. And because when he's saying he's tired because he doesn't know where to go with it, I think he's probably doing the same things over and over and over again. And what I can go back with Nathan too, because being with Nathan, you could sit there and be tired of him being in bed and complaining about this, or he'll tell you to go away when he doesn't want you there and whatnot. And it can be tiring, and for his mother, she just turned 80, and she's she's the strongest woman I know. I mean, she's just amazing how she was able to take care of Nathan. And what I found was that I had to animate myself to the point where he was going to think that I was crazy, so that we could come up with some sort of diversion that was going to make me not tired of doing the same thing every day, or whatever. So I created this game of cards, and he, of course, with having cerebral palsy, he can't use his hands very well. So I would put the cards flat face down on the thing, and we'd go 1, 2, 3, spit. And he, when I say, or I would say move. Yeah, I played that many times. And he would take his fist or this part of his hand there and slide the card off, and I would pick it up and look at it. And if he got above 6 or below, if he got above 6, he won. If he got below 6, I won. And of course, I would always make sure that he won. So, and I would say, "Oh man, I can't believe you just won that one too." And of course, that changed the whole atmosphere going. He starts laughing, I start laughing. There's so many instances where I found that I had to kind of be creative. Driving in the car with Nathan, he gets kind of sometimes bored. He loves to listen to the music and whatnot, but sometimes he just kind of like sits there and he kind of veggies out. So one thing I found out that he loves it when I spit out the window. So I open up the window and I go, I do a hockaloogie, and he's just in hysterics, I mean, you have to go to different lengths to get the atmosphere to change. And the whole thing is you have to really know who you're taking care of.
I mean, it's amazing how much you care enough to figure all of this out. I mean, someone right now who is tired of taking care of someone, that's so common, because it's all about them. And you've done things that bring you into it as well.
Yes.
And it's not just all about it. It may in fact be all about them, but you've made it pleasurable for yourself.
Yeah. I mean, with Nathan, I find I bring up Nathan because I've been with him for 27 years now, so it's it's become routine. And even now, he'll be sitting there, and just before I'm ready to go home or whatever, he'll get mad at me because I'm going to be going home. So I'll say, "Oh, you're not mad at me again," and I'll open the door to the closet and walk in the closet and shut the door. And then I'm real silent for a minute, and then I'll knock on the door and I'll say, "Nathan, I'm lost," or "I can't get out, Nathan," and he just is hysterical. And I say, "Can I come out now?" And he goes, "Yeah," and I come out, and he's just laughing like crazy. Little tiny things like that. When I do it because I think it's a lot of fun anyway, and I'm kind of wacky anyway, but I just find that
you're a good caregiver. You understand, you're patient and you don't take things personally anymore, I guess.
Yeah, I did for a while. I did take it personally.
Yeah. Listen, we're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. Don't go away.
We are a community of caregivers that understands and supports you wherever you are in your journey. We are a place to connect with other caregivers, but more importantly, a place to get practical, actionable help. There are lots of ways for you to get support. First of all, you can download our welcome pack. This will get you started on your Thrive journey. Next, you can ask and get answers to your questions by posting them here in our private Facebook groups. You can also get live online support by attending one of our live weekly Connect webinars. You can get practical, actionable advice by listening to our weekly podcast. You can hear and read other stories about other caregivers' experiences. Plus, add your own in our weekly Share Your Story forum, posted every Tuesday in the Facebook group. You can access essential resources and download practical Thrive Solutions packs, all of which are geared to help you thrive as a caregiver. You get lifetime access to all of our resources. Again, we're here to support you. and to help you thrive and to enjoy your life as a caregiver. And remember, this is a place to get hope, not just cope.
So we're back with our guest, Robert Kershaw, and my lovely co-host, Adrienne Gruberg. I'm Dave Nassaney. We're on the Caregiver Dave Show. And so let's talk about this book here. If I should die before I wake. What an interesting
I love the name.
Well,
caregiver's journey.
when I
That's
was
the prayer that we pray when we're young, right?
yeah. Well, when I was with taking care of Mark, who's a friend of mine who had AIDS, he would in the 90s and the 80s, if you had HIV, if you were HIV positive, then you knew it was a death sentence.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right.
So, working with people like that, I had friends who said they were going to go to Atlanta. When I worked in some of the retail stores and whatnot. They said, "Oh, I'm moving down to Atlanta," and I said, "Oh, you're going to love Atlanta," and not knowing that was called the Elephant's Graveyard, because that's where the CDC was, and they were doing all the experimental drugs down there, and they were doing all of the different things, and I had no clue that that's what he was doing and why he was going down there. And one of my friends went down, and within about 7 or 8 months, he was gone, and it just shocked me. And then I met somebody. I didn't know anything about AIDS at the time. I didn't know what it was or whatever. And then a friend of mine got it, and we had a long conversation about it. And then when I was taking care of Mark, he said something to me. Oh, as he was going along, he was getting worse and worse, and he kept on saying, I've still got to go to work, and even though my leg is swollen, or even though I got this or whatever, I've still got to go to work. And he inspired me so much. For somebody who knew he was going to die, had very little hope at all in that area, and his legs, he was going through, he had Kaposi's sarcoma. There was a whole bunch of other issues too, and so he was going through chemotherapy or radiation treatments, the whole 9 yards. And even through all of that, he had this thing about, I want to make sure everything's okay before I die, And so at night, I would tuck him in, or make sure he had water on his dresser, make sure his pills were there or whatever, and then I would either go into the living room and watch TV, or sometimes I'd just go out for a walk because I needed some space. And he would look at me and say, "Listen, if I die before I wake, make sure that my checking account is balanced, or make sure that make sure you get the groceries that were set up, because we want to make sure that everything's on." Or he'd have something, but he always used that, and at first I couldn't understand it, but then I realized he was so conscious of the fact that he was going to die that he knew someday he was going to not wake up, and so that stuck in my mind.
And one day before he died, he said that, and that was the last time, right?
Mm-hmm. And it stuck with me for so long.
What did you think that next morning when you woke up and he wasn't there like he always was?
Well, no, I was there when he did die. I was at the hospital. There's a whole story in the book about that. We had it's a lot like COVID in a lot of ways, except COVID is moving 10 times faster than AIDS.
Airborne.
And touching more people.
And also the political realms is also the same, but that's fast.
There's always politics with a virus, isn't there?
Isn't it?
Yeah. There's a different stigma that was attached to AIDS that's not attached to this.
But we're still political,
Yeah, and people call it the gay virus. Yeah, people will call it the gay virus, or the drug. If you're an addict, you're going to get AIDS or whatever. They always pinned it on certain populations, and we do the same thing with COVID too. But anyway, he was in the hospital, and I was right there when he died. I was holding his hand. His mother was sitting on the other side of the bed, and he knew he was going to go, and he just looked at me and he said, the last thing he said, or that before he went to bed that night, he said, "Listen, if I die before I wake, make sure my mother's okay." Right?
Mm.
So that morning we went in and he was still around, and we were both talking to him, and he was in so much pain they gave him some morphine to help with the pain, and that was when he just stopped breathing, and he just kind of as he was going through that, he looked at me as if to say, don't forget the checking account, or whatever, and it was like, okay, and and when he did go, it was the weirdest feeling was, and I've been with so many people who have passed away when they've died. It's such an amazing experience, where they just, then they're just not in the body. They're not there anymore. And of course,
All of a sudden.
naturally you look up. You look up to see if they're floating over you or something,
Yeah.
and I looked up and I say, Mark, okay, don't get any ideas. And, it was like, it was such a spiritual experience for me. And I think the two things in the world we don't understand are birth and death. When someone is born, before they're born, we know that it's a whole process. We still don't understand a lot of it, and we don't understand after death. So we have assumptions. We have, we work with the Bible. People have taught us certain things. We start to believe things. We want to we want to believe the right thing,
Right.
and yet we still don't understand it. And some people say they've been there and have come back, and that's, I haven't yet, so I'm still questioning a lot of things. So, but
This sounds
the two
silly,
things
but,
that I've noticed was that the birth and death are two of the most beautiful things I've ever experienced.
yeah.
It was just, they died in, and all that pain was gone. All of that, you know, trouble and worry and whatever.
Uh-huh.
It was for everybody that was in the room. It was just like, it was just gone, and it was just almost like permission to move on, permission to go to the next step. And it was just so emotional for me. Even now, I kind of get,
Yeah.
choked up with it. But with Elsie, I was there the day before she died. She had a stroke, and she was in this, looked like a crib, and she was crawling over to the edge of the railing, and I put my hand over there. She kept on pushing her hand over, and I grabbed her hand, and everybody told me that she couldn't talk. She didn't understand what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And she grabbed my hand and she pulled me right into where the crib was. And she looked at me and she whispered, she says, "We had a great friendship."
Mm-hmm.
And that was the last thing I heard her say. And she had tears coming down her eyes. I could see. And then other people were coming in, and she kind of looked at me and rolled her eyes, and it was almost like she didn't want to talk to anybody else because, all they were doing is making her more miserable,
Mm-hmm.
with what they were talking about, because they didn't think she could hear her. So, and she heard everything apparently.
Mm.
And then the next day, I called the hospital and they said she had passed away. So it was, all these different experiences that I've had,
Yeah.
that have really woken me up to so many amazing things that, I look at life. And in the book, there's one whole chapter that I try to envelop, and I'm trying to do a whole book on it. And it's called Legacy. When I was working with people with HIV, my son, who adopted me when he was 9, his mother was HIV positive, and she was one of my clients basically, and I did a program for care education. And one of the things that mostly everybody who was dying of AIDS and a lot of people who had cancer were saying, that I don't want to die as a statistic or a number.
Mm-hmm.
I want to die with a name. And I said, well, how do what do you want people to know about you? And they couldn't tell me. So I created a program, and it's called Legacy, basically.
Right.
And the first question is, if you were to die right now, how do you think you would be remembered? Right? And what they do is we talk about that for a long period of time. how they think, well, if I do this, if people think I'm crazy, so maybe they think I'm crazy, whatever. So they kind of explore all those things, and then they can go out and ask their family, their friends, if I were to die today, what would be the one thing that you remembered about me? And it's a hard process to do because you're talking about something that's very sensitive. So we go through that, and then we come back and we talk about that for a while. The next question is, if you were to die today, or if you were to leave my presence, leave this room, or leave this life, and that's how I preamble it. How would you like to be remembered? All right. So they go through a whole period of thinking about, how would I want people to remember me? What do you want? What do you want on your tombstone? What do you want on your Facebook? How do you want to be presented when somebody remembers you? That type of thing. So they go around and they do a whole series of things, explore themselves, and come up with the whole thing. We come back and we talk about that, and we talk about how what that would mean in their life, and once you get all that done, then knowing the answer to both of those questions, what is it you need to do or not do, eliminate or add to your life to create the legacy that you want to leave? What are some of the tools that you'll need? So, for example, the reason I wrote the book was because I wanted my family to know who I was, and my sister said it very, very honestly and very well. She said, "I've known my brother for years. I grew up with him, and I knew he lived in New York, and I knew he did this, and I knew he did that. I had no idea who he was until I read the book." And what I did was basically, I wanted them to understand who I was, and I wanted I wanted this to be my legacy, the book. I didn't even care if I sold the book, at that point. It could probably, because I was so frustrated with publishers. That's a whole other story. I could write a book on that. But the one thing I felt was that the book has given, and even people who have read it, and students that I've had over the years. One student came up to me and said, I'm going through some things with my sister and my mother, and you had to be really, really, that was the most courageous thing I've ever read. And I didn't know what he meant. And he basically, he explained it to me after, is that, I was taking my heart and my soul and my guts and just putting it out on the table for everyone to dish at. And to me, it's just, it's a book. But now I'm hearing other people say, it's really validated everything that I've ever done in my life, because they're caregivers too, and with the book, you can put the legacy program with schools. I work with teenagers, and I say, okay, you're the senior class now. What is the legacy you want to leave? If you were to graduate right now, what would be your legacy? And they look at themselves and they go, holy crap, oh my God, I don't know. I've done so many bad things in my, I've gotten in trouble so many times or whatever. And I say, okay, then they look at that, and then I say, okay, what kind of a legacy do you want to leave as a group, as a whole group? And so they do. And I say, okay, now what are the things you need to do, and what are the tools that you're going to use? And I present them with tools of, you've got photography, you've got the internet. I'm leaving a legacy for my grandson, who is he'll be a year and a half. He's probably the joy of my life, and his name is Samueli, which is the name of my son was taken care of by Bert Ulrich. His first name was Samuel, and my middle name is Eli. And that's why I use it in the book. And so he wanted his son's name to reflect that, so he called him Samuel. And I said, well, that leaves me out, I guess, huh? And we, kidding. And about 3 weeks later, he says, no, we decided to call him Samueli. So Eli at the end, so it's Samueli.
That'll be fun in school.
Oh, I know, they're going to call him Smelly. But I told his mother that.
So your son is black, right? What
Yeah,
are some of
he's
the
African
issues and
American.
hurdles of taking care of a black son
Oh my God, I've learned
when
so
as a
much from him.
caregiver?
Um, I've been able to see. Well, he was targeted very much when he was a kid. When he got pulled over or stopped and frisked, which was a big thing then. He got stopped and frisked quite a bit apparently, and a couple of times he did it. And I went right to the police station and I said, "This is my son, and I want to know why he was stopped and frisked." And nobody could really tell me, and all they could say is that he looked suspicious.
Right.
And finally, after the third time, I said, "No, he didn't look suspicious. He looked black." And they didn't know what to say with that. And I thought I was going to get arrested for saying
For
something to a
being
cop. I
honest.
didn't. Yeah.
What city?
And what's
What
that?
city? What
That
city
was
was
in
that in?
Yonkers, New York. Yeah. And so it was one of those things where I started to see things through his eyes more than I could ever imagine. And um, when I would go and pick him up when he was about 9 years old, he was living with his mother in the projects, and I would drive in. Plus, I must be I'm either really ignorant or stupid. I'm not sure, but I would drive into the projects and park my car right down below, and I would. I got really kind of concerned when a whole bunch of the guys would surround the car, and I would say hi to them and whatnot, and I'd say I was waiting for Homer, and they said, "Oh, okay, all right." So Homer would come down and he would go, he's cool," you know. We'd get in, and then one day I took Father Bert's car, and it has the sign clergy on the inside of it.
Hmm.
So I parked it there, and I got out of the car, and I was going to go in the building, and all these guys came over, and they says, "Oh, good morning, Father. Good morning, Father. God bless you, bless you." And of course, I played on this one right, right to the T. And they said, "We'll watch your car for you. We'll watch your car for you." Good morning, Father. And so I went up and I got Homer. I came back down, and sure enough, they were taking care of the car, and they weren't going to go to hell, I guess. It was amazing. So, little actions like that and little things like that really opened my eyes to so many different things.
Yeah,
Um,
I was innocent and naive also because I bought an apartment building in Nashville that they told me was right next door to the Belmont University where the presidential debates were. They didn't tell me it was next door to the projects too, where people were shooting each other and killing. So I would go. I'm a walker. I would go for walks around the thing,
yeah,
and I was
same here.
going into these neighborhoods, and people are looking at me, and there must have been angels watching over me because I'm surprised I got out of there alive.
But when I was uh, in my early years, I was in Providence, Rhode Island, and I worked for a program called Progress for Providence, and they created a camp for kids in the inner city in the basement of the library. And so we had all these activities and whatnot. And we only had a few kids in there, and I said, I'm going to go out and see if I can, canvas for some more kids. So I went out into the projects, and it was called Chad Brown, and I had nobody told me it was all black. And so I just went in and I started going door to door, knocking on the doors and passing out flyers and talking to them about them. And people were looking at me like, "Are you serious?" And I didn't know what they were talking. It just, I was just canvassing for more kids to come into the program. And when I got back to the program, they said, "Where did you go?" And I told them. He says, "You went there and you didn't have an escort?" I said, "Yeah, why?" He said, "You don't do that, He said, "You're employed here. We need you." and I so and one of the kids came in. The new kids came in, and he saw me there, and he says, "Oh, you're that crazy white guy that was down in the projects the other day."
Yeah, well, that's what they called me, a crazy white guy.
Yeah.
Listen, we've only got a couple of minutes left over, so how do you want to spend that? Do you want to tell us how to get a hold of you? Where they
Sure.
can buy your
Well,
book, website,
I've
whatever
got
you
a
want to
website.
do.
I've got a website. It's author Eli Shaw, no spaces in between, .com. And in there you can see a lot of the author,
Author.
A-U-T-H, yeah, A-U-T-H-O-R, Eli, E-L-I,
Ah.
S-H-A-W.com. And that'll take you right to a lot of pictures of the people that I worked with, my son, Elsie, all the people that are in there. One thing, I'm writing a supplement to this also. It's called COVID and Me, and it's a lot of it has to do with some of the things that we're doing that almost replicate what we did during the AIDS crisis and some of the other pandemics that we did, and have turned it into a political agenda. And I'm writing a lot of different things about how what took 30 years to get to the amount of people who had HIV or who were HIV positive, and what is taking the time that it's taking for people to get to where it would go to get to that point if we keep on the same course is only going to take about 30 months to get to the same amount of people who had it in 30 years. And we're looking at it like this is a virus or a cold or a flu. And I mean, I lost two relatives right now. There's a friend of mine, a high school friend of mine, whose whole family, his family, but his son's family had it. And I've lost a friend of mine in New Jersey. They just adopted somebody, and he died. 7 people in California initially had passed away. 2 in Washington, and one friend of mine who was with the publishing company that I was with. He passed away. So I've got all these people around me that are passing away, and it's so real for me. It's one of the most real things that I can dish out right now. And when I see people walking around without the mask, when I see people walking around and doing things that, really makes me feel like, we're in this together, it just, and turning it into a political agenda just blows my mind. It absolutely blows my mind. And I don't know how to address it except to say that, this is a virus. It doesn't have its own agenda. It's just floating around there, and it's going to do what it's going to do. We're the only ones with the agenda, and we have to change that agenda to combat what we are going through. And I don't know where to go with that. So that's part of it. But I want to address caregivers all over. That
well, we've run out of time.
Okay.
I wish we can keep going. But Adrienne, we get a hold of you at the caregiverspace.org, and I'm at caregiverdave.com. For some reason, I can't stop that noise. So thank you for coming on the show. We'll have to do it again sometime. So why don't we just say goodbye, and we'll see you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Definitely. I want to thank you so much. This has been a joy.
Great.
Sometimes it feels like the sun will never rise, like the birds will never sing.